Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg DeShields, and I am the host of the podcast Something to Say with Greg DeShields. And I'm thrilled to speak with all of you today. And this is actually my second live prompt um, opportunity. And I have to say that the first one was so much fun, I had to come back and do it again. I am going to be joined by the incredible Dr. Theresa Canada shortly, who hosts the Silk Stocking Sisters podcast. But until she joins us, I thought it would be great that I take the opportunity to tell you about Something to Say podcasts and really to respond to today's prompt. And today's prompt is a really interesting one. It's why is it important to balance your passion with what the listeners want as you develop a podcast? And I have to tell you, it is a very interesting challenge to ensure that you have all of the things necessary in order to deliver a quality program, but also to be genuine to the audience that you are providing content for. And for Something to Say, our podcast is all about passion. We're really excited about the work that we do with Something to Say podcasts because we wanted to be able to interview just about anybody and allow for them to share whatever their passion is, how it affects them in their personal life, and how it affects them professionally. And we have found throughout the course of now our second season, first and second season, that passion plays a very important part to a lot of the success that individuals have had. And each time we're able to share a story, it is something that is extremely meaningful. We've had everything from doctors to business leaders to individuals who support diverse communities to, believe it or not, someone who does marketing for synthetic blood, which was actually a very interesting podcast when he talked about the type of campaigns that he has developed in order to show you the true meaning and the true feeling about blood. But before I get too involved in the discussion about the type of programming that we do, I did want to share that, podcasting is a very unique form and platform for you to tell stories. And I think those who are in the membership of a live podcast, the variety of storytellers are creative in terms of putting together content that shares all different perspectives and all different points of view. Some of them are very direct and very specific. Hey, there goes Teresa. Hi, Teresa. How are
I'm
you?
here.
That's all
Good. Nice
right.
to meet you, Mr.
Nice,
DeShields.
nice meeting you as well. And let me just say, I had started talking to our audience about this particular session. I did a little introduction about my podcast, but I did let them know that the very distinguished Theresa Canada is joining us and that you represent the Silk Stocking Sisters podcast.
Correct.
So why don't we take a minute and, or actually, you could take a few more moments. We're going to be on this for a little while. Why don't you tell us about yourself and tell us about your podcast?
Okay. Well, basically, I don't know where to start, but I'm going to start where I can start. I I'll start with the podcast first. I'm the host of the Silk Stocking Sisters podcast, which I started a while ago, and basically, it's based upon topics related to my the book that I wrote. Okay, that's the first part. I'm also a professor of education and educational psychology. I'm also a licensed professional counselor. I actually a clinical mental health provider. So that kind of balances a lot between being a podcast host, being an author, being a professor, being a licensed professional counselor. So I have many things that I can do that I choose to do that I find that it makes me more comfortable being able to share in different ways.
Well, that ability to be so confident in your content and the level of expertise that you have in order to interpret and then respond to a lot of the dialogue and the questions that come about. Now, I've shared with our audience, our prompt is, why is it important to balance your passion with what listeners want? And having the level of expertise that you have at being a thought leader and a knowledge expert of the subject,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we are podcast hosts, right? We
That's
have
right. That's right. That's
to-
right. Absolutely. It's absolutely, and part of that has to do with, I'm glad you asked about the passion. One of the things that this is really a true story that really gave me the emphasis to actually do this podcast was that I was speaking I was lecturing at this education club where students have asked me to talk about my book. So the young lady who happened to have been the president of that particular organization, after I presented, presented this about the book, she said to me, Dr. Canada, I didn't know schools were segregated in the North. I was horrified. I'm not talking about this is a couple of years ago. I'm not talking about 1960. This is a couple of years ago.
Wow.
So that in turn gave me the impetus to just say, okay, what else can I do to get some information out about this topic or these topics that I've addressed in the book and beyond? So that's what gave me the so-called passion to make the move to be a podcast host.
Well, for me, I had been the host of a podcast many years ago when it was more cocktail talk, when you
Yes,
would be, having a drink and
yes.
you say, by the way, I started a podcast, right? And they would say, not another podcast, right? But I did a podcast around multicultural tourism for about 7 years, and I really enjoyed it. I felt like I got smarter and smarter each time I talked to someone because they
Right,
gave me
right.
such an incredible insight. And then I had the opportunity to revisit podcasting about a year ago, and we're in our second season now, so pretty excited about
Great. That's fantastic.
that.
Good for
Thank you.
you. I'm a little ashamed here. Okay.
Trust me, it's all about the post production. That's what I say. It's all about that. But
Absolutely.
I wanted to create a podcast that was going to be something that anyone would listen to. I didn't want it to be about tourism. I didn't want it to be about diversity. I didn't want it to have something very specific. But, throughout my career, I've always heard that passion drives what you do, and how you're able to kind of navigate passion at work and passion at home is what we wanted to bring together. So we encourage people through a variety of questions. A lot of them in the beginning are just kind of the easy ones. Let's get to know you. One of our interesting questions, which I love to hear a response to, is if
Mhm.
you could have dinner with anybody dead or alive, who would that be and why?
That's a good one. That's a really good one.
We've gotten some really great responses. I think, believe it or not, the top one is Mandela, which is fantastic. Um,
Okay.
we've had some people who said Jesus, which I thought was also quite
Okay.
interesting.
Okay.
Many people said Martin Luther King. So it's
Really?
been an interesting mix. Yeah. But our closing statement is, what do you have to say? And what we've always found is that it's a very positive message that people would like to leave, which is very encouraging as you think of our society today and the kind
Right.
of challenges that we
Right.
face, that
Right.
people leave with such a positive message. But it is a unique balance, to find the person obviously who can engage in dialogue and has a bit of a personality and has something really interesting to say and brings that passion out. So, how do you find the individuals that will provide the kind of conversation you're looking for?
Well, in essence, I think much of it has to do with the topics that I want to talk about, that I want to hear. Okay. And it's interesting that you asked that question because I didn't really think about it until you just asked the question. So I select individuals or I request or I ask based upon topics related to, like I said, the issues around the podcast, but also something that I may want to learn from them.
Mm.
Okay, that's also very important to hear their point of view about an issue or a book they've written or where they lived and how their experiences were where they lived, as opposed to what other people might think it's like. So they bring a different voice that I wouldn't necessarily hear. So I think that's some of the things that I ask. I select people who could offer something that maybe I don't know about.
Mm.
And there's a lot of that, believe me. Okay. Quite a bit. I don't know everything. So that's the key. I want to be able to share with others what other people's thoughts are. I have my own thoughts that I bring to the podcast, but at the same time, I think it's important people to hear other viewpoints as well. And I think that is the other piece that I think that I offer the audience about the topics that are covered. I mean, it's a variety of topics, but much of it comes from the base. We have a baseline. Okay, I know yours about traveling and so forth. You have a baseline that you're seeking to discuss, but at the same time, someone may have a different take on it, and you want to ask that person to come and give their take on this issue or this topic or this book, something like that. I think that enhances the interest and the drive. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I'm surprised because they mention things I don't even know. I do my little research, but they mention things like, "Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that." And then you end up saying, "Oh, I know that person too." Okay, that's really what the surprise. I mean, you talk about the end, how you end. There are times where I'm so surprised, and there are many of the people who I've had on the podcast are people who I know of or know through someone else, which is interesting. And I put a call out to some people that I know. This is my topic, and anybody, and you'd be surprised the people say, "Oh," and I said, I said, that person. I didn't know you knew this person. I've known this person for 5 years. I didn't know this about that person. So even the topic, you may have a topic that may be of interest, but not knowing the person you might know of has any interest in that same topic or has any involvement in the topic.
Right.
So that
let me ask you a question, and maybe I'll just be a little, podcast geeky.
Okay.
Do you develop a script that you follow in advance of your podcast, or is it just a natural flow of a conversation?
That's a really great question, but there are two parts to that for me. There are sessions where I just am the only person there, and I don't have a guest. Okay, that's key.
Okay.
All right. So when I have a guest, it's just what the person's topic is, and we go from there. All right. There are certain questions I want to ask, and then basically they start saying other things, and I just follow up. It's like a flow. It's like that's the professor in me, I guess. My point. I have to say that may be the professor in me. So you start talking about a topic. I already have an idea what the person's focus is. All right. Now, sometimes do I have to do a little research? Maybe, maybe not. But I very rarely have a script when I have a guest. Very rarely. I'm thinking now, which guest did I have a script for? I'm just trying to think. Maybe two, maybe. Right. Okay. Other than that, if it's just me speaking, I may have a script. I may have done my research. I have topics, and I'll go by, because I don't know all the data. I mean, I'm even bringing up data. I have to reference my data and so forth. I want to make sure I'm giving people accurate information. But for those, usually when I'm alone, it's mostly more scripted. Does that help?
So that's a great answer. So, and I haven't done like a solo show, so I have to think about that because that could be a lot of fun. The other is, we also thinking of our audience and the flow. Have you put a great deal of emphasis around the production part of it? Meaning, do you add sound or music, or how do you edit? So how do you come up with the final product that, once again, is to be attractive and really resonate with your audience?
Okay, this is really simple. I have someone else who does it for me.
That's it.
Okay, that's easy. No, but basically, I have an intro and an extra. Okay. I have that's standard. All right. So that's the only thing that's really standard, the intro and the extra. I don't have music playing during these sessions. I don't have figures hanging around. I don't have any kind of graphics going on at all. All right. I want to focus on the individual who's there, between that individual and myself, that we can have this dialogue. We laugh, we joke, but the focus is on the individual. I think it's important because people need to be recognized. To me, that's our first art. Recognize people. Okay, people want to be recognized. So this gives them the opportunity to be recognized. I'm not interested in terms of a lot of flash in the pan kind of stuff. I'm more interested in the substance. So if I do my intro piece that's there, then the conversation flows. We have a topic we're going to talk about. And, I kind of, lead here and go. The person may say something that I didn't expect them to say, and I ask them to elaborate. But I really enjoy the naturalistic perspective of the conversations with the guests. We all know there's a certain topic that I'm asking them to come and talk about, usually, but then it'll veer off and it brings something even unexpected. And the person may talk about something else. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know that. I did such and such as well, kind of thing. Right. So, but in terms of the production piece, I leave it to the experts. Okay. I set up what I want to do for intro and the music I want to have, so forth, and the extra. But otherwise, the rest of the set is just the conversation, the flow, and the discussion. Does that help?
My post-production person, Mohammed Adnan, and he is absolutely fabulous. He lives in Pakistan, and he's been with us since the launch. But what is amazing is there's a point where you say, here are the ideas, here are the things that I would like, and somewhere between what I want and what I get is certainly what I'll accept. And the more we've worked together, he's gotten a better sense of my style and he edits accordingly. We wanted to keep our podcast to about 25 minutes.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's so much rich content,
Yes, it goes over. We can't control those things. You know that, right? I mean, literally, you say you start out with, because people ask me, well, how long is it going to be? I said 20 to 30 minutes max.
Right.
I've had to do that. I'm going to ask you, have you had to have 2 sessions with someone or have one session and cut it into 2 parts?
I did. I had one guy and he was amazing. First off, he had the voice for radio. We did a part about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he was a bit of a historian. So he had a lot of historical context that he wanted the audience to understand. So one story wasn't just one story. One story could be like, 25 minutes long.
Right.
A year. He told the story about his mother because they lived in New Orleans and she was an incredible woman who was a dean at a university. And he had talked about all that his mother did to achieve that level of accomplishment at a university and how she instilled the value of being a knowledge expert and academic and study and that sort of thing within her children. And that story was so rich, there was no way we could cut it and I couldn't rush him.
Right.
So we did part 1 and part 2. And both of his episodes were our top 2 of that whole year.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
his first, we had close to 1,000 listens of that. And the follow-up one came in at about 1,200. So he was amazing, but we had to split it up into 2 just because he was so great.
See, that's what I'm saying, that's something that's unexpected.
Yes.
So that's why I was going to ask you, do you say like people start talking and then split it up? And I think that's helpful because, if you stay sometimes too strict to your script, you miss out opportunities that may come out of the process. And that's something I just learned recently. That's why I want to ask you if that was something you were doing, because it has only happened once for me recently. Right. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have to make this 2 episodes. There's no way. I'm supposed to keep talking about this topic. And I asked the guest, do you mind? I said, because I really want to hear the people's audience to hear your information, which you're sharing. And I don't want to just cut it off. So that's the first time I actually had that done. And I want to know if that's something you've used in the past. And is it really worth it? And you're just sharing with me now that it was absolutely something that was.
It was absolutely, yeah. But the one thing I will say is sometimes it can be so unexpected. So I had an interview with an individual who was very well known as a business leader, somebody who had a very high profile personality. And there was a lot that you kind of expected in terms of what she was going to talk about. So I asked her what was the best day of her life and what was the worst day of her life. So the best day of her life was when her children was born, and she talked about that. And then she said the worst day of her life was about her husband, which, it immediately kind of took me back. So
Mhm.
she told me the story about her husband. So her husband worked at a university and he taught dentistry.
Okay.
And in the early years, there used to be what was called a confidence man. This is where you learn all this stuff. So, a confidence man used to provide cocaine to the dentist schools so they could rub it on the teeth of their patients in
Right.
order to do dental work. Well, he became addicted to cocaine.
Oh,
And she went on to tell the story, and then she went on to say that through his addiction, their marriage broke up. And then ultimately, he passed away due to his addiction. But it was so shocking because you would never, I mean, for as much as and she's a pretty public person, you would have never thought that. We knew she was on her third marriage, but had no idea the history of her first marriage. So I immediately thought to myself, how do I make the transition? And that's part of the flow. Like when you have someone who really bears their soul, you're asking them to tell you about their
yeah.
passion,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they are going to tell you that. Script or no script, you have to acknowledge it. And I did. I told her how that was such a revealing and inspiring story that you told, and your personality, your pertinacity to kind of live through that. It
Well,
was just so honest.
that's what I was going to ask you next. How do you handle those? They're uncontrollable kinds of situations where you don't know
Mhm,
what the person is going to say, and how do you
mhm,
respond to that? So you have your insight in terms of the things that you want to discuss. At some
mhm,
point, something goes off to the left field, or left right side, and you're like,
mhm.
okay, where do I go with that? How do you
Yeah.
manage that when you're on your podcast? That's the question I'd like to ask that to you.
Yeah, so for me, because the podcast is about passion, regardless what they talk about, I will always respond to it, acknowledging how authentic that is, how genuine, how honest that is, and how that can serve as an inspiring message. There was a woman who told the story of where a 7,000-pound tree fell on her and made her paraplegic. And she's telling every nuance of that story, the pain and the depression, the isolation. I mean, all the things that she went through. And because once again the podcast is about passion, I've learned that you are going to get some stories that are so incredibly personal that it's more important to connect with them as a person and acknowledge just how incredibly resilient you are as a person, how you certainly serve as an inspiration to others, to reinforce that that's what passion does. It allows you to overcome through challenges in life and that sort of thing. And if I'm able to reinforce that message around three or four points of acknowledgement, I can then make a segue into something that's on a lighter note, or some other thing that has been a very clear positive thing that's happened to them, and then I connect the strength from that bad experience to what allowed for them to be as success as they are. So but for me it is about being as transparent as possible, to acknowledge the the experience that that person has had, and let them know that that is a very authentic way of communicating, and that's what the podcast is about. And in a way, I really look for more of that out of the conversations because it
Mhm.
means so much more for the listeners.
Well, see, I was going to ask you about the authenticity of the issue. That was the main thing I was going to ask you about because to
Mhm.
me, people can pick that up right away. And
Yeah.
I, you know, that's why I really don't use scripts per se.
Yes.
I try to be able to get the information about what the
Mhm.
person's going to speak, their background, and so forth and so on. And of course, surprises come about. But at the same time,
Mhm.
it gives me a level playing field starting out. And
Mhm.
then how it weaves and goes in and out throughout the whole session, and being
Mhm.
able to just be astute. But I think what you're
Mhm.
saying is that what I do, I try to be as authentic as possible. Um, you know, it's interesting. People who don't know me as a professor, and they listen, "Who is you?" Well, okay, but I'm just saying, you wear different hats. You wear
Yeah.
different gloves. You become what you need to become at the moment. So if you have this attitude, well, I have to stick by this and I have to have this topic and I got to stay right here. I can't,
Mhm.
move from veer from here to there. Then I don't believe people will resonate well with the podcast. That's my
Mhm.
sense. Now,
Mhm.
my topic is more like historical. Um, so it makes it some things you just it's either there or not there. Okay. But I also like the fact that people, when you involve people in the process, not just giving the facts, it brings another dimension to the topic.
Mhm.
And that's what I seek. So that's what that whole issue talk about authenticity. It's very
Mhm.
important because people can see right through that. They can hear right through that. Okay. And I believe that's what I want to offer with podcasts, to make sure people understand that this is not just something we're making up. This is something just be fun. This, you
Mhm.
can just still tell history. You can talk about historical perspectives from a way that's not going to be so strict and rigid. At the same
Mhm.
time, make it human, make it a human connection. So to me,
Mhm.
that's why I mean about authentic, being authentic. Now, I'm not sure, maybe you might describe it differently, but to me, you bring who you are where you are.
Mhm.
Okay. So if I'm asking someone to come and talk about a book they've written related to their experience of, like, for example, I'll say, for example, in the schools in city of Philadelphia, about blacks
Mhm.
in schools in Philadelphia, you know, I expect there's going to be some things that can be different that I don't know about. But at the
Mhm.
same time, the person has done the research. They know more about the topic than I do, and at least they should. But it doesn't mean that I don't also have something else to offer and ask about that particular topic. And I think
Mhm.
that helps the dialogue. So, I'm not going to sit there and say, well, I don't know absolutely anything about what you're talking about. First of all, I wouldn't come unprepared. That's number one.
Mhm.
So if
Mhm.
I don't have that much knowledge about the topic, then I'll say, look, I did a little research and this is what I know. Can you share more about the topic?
Mhm.
So it depends upon what the person's is going to come and talk about. And then what have I'm not going to walk into the studio. I'm not going to sit there and have a podcast session and not know anything about what the person's talking about.
Right.
I think that, to me, I think that's not a good idea. Okay.
Mhm.
And you ask many of the podcast hosts, with their passion, yeah, you want people to be able to share. For me, it's a sharing opportunity. Um, and that's how I look at it. I don't have all the answers. And I'm pretty sure other people don't have all the answers either. But we're bringing a service to people by this.
Mhm.
I see it as a learning opportunity. I see it as a way to people to share. Okay. There's so many other characteristics that you can mention, so many qualities you can mention.
Mhm.
I just think we all bring different things based upon what we offer
Mhm.
to our audience. So the passion is there. That's number
Right.
one.
So, how does humor fit into your interviews? What I try to look for is an opportunity for the persona of the person to kind of break away a little bit and they share their humor. Like I interviewed the one guy and he was telling a story about his dad, which, his dad was his world. And when he lost his father, it devastated him. But I asked him, questions about food. And anyway, we'd asked him if you could have dinner with someone who was no longer with us, who would it be? And he said his dad, and he
Okay.
told us all the reasons why. And then I said, well, what would you eat, during the course of the time that you're there? And he was like, well, now that I think about it, my dad was all about fried chicken and collard greens and sweet potato pie. And I was like, okay, so that's cool. And then he said, there was this weird thing my dad used to do. And I said, what is that? So his dad loved ice cold milk. He would take a glass of milk and he would put ice in it. And it was just the way he drank milk. But when he finished the glass, he would put it in the freezer
Hmm.
and he would use it again when he wanted another glass of it. So I said to him, I said, I've known you a while, but I never realized I had the same kind of tendency around ice cold milk like you did. Because I said I do exactly the same thing.
Gosh.
I love ice milk, and I put a glass
Unbelievable.
in. He said we thought it was gross when he was a kid.
But little did he know that you have the same kind of habits, right?
Same habit. It was so funny. I was just
That's a
like,
good one. That's a good, but see, that's good. That's a good thing. It's an excellent, because it shows that it's not necessarily scripted. It's unexpected. And I think audiences want to hear some of the unexpected stuff. And I think it was a good blend. I mean, who would have ever thought, right? Who would have thought?
Well, the last woman I interviewed, well, hers hasn't been released yet, but
Okay.
she had definitely said she wanted to have dinner with Mandela. And I asked her what she would like to serve. And she's like, look, I'm from New Orleans. So she said, it's definitely going to be some kind of gumbo. And then she said, I'd put in a little of this and a little of that. And she said, well, because it's him, I'll put in some lobster and some shrimp. And it was so much fun to listen to her talk about it. But it also allowed for her to allow for her Southern charm to come out, because that's the other part, is how people are able to present their natural being. And when she started talking about food and a lot of the dishes that were very much, connected to Louisiana, she was just the most fun. I didn't want her to stop talking about it, to be honest.
Oh, that's wonderful. But that begs another question. Do you have special techniques that you use? Okay, in terms of engaging your guests.
Well, I will break up their questions. So there's the icebreaker questions, and then there's the get to know you questions. And because they kind of know what's coming down the pike, I don't script what the answer is, but I do let them know here's how we're going to segue through. So that allows for me to kind of move them through the conversation, because we'll move to a portion where we'll ask them to talk about business and industry. What are your thoughts about it? What are the misconceptions and those sorts of things? And then we ask for them to give us 4 questions that they want us to ask them, because at the end of the day, there's stuff that they want to talk about.
Okay.
So giving them that ability to provide the questions, they have a message that they want to deliver, and we want to give them that platform in order to do it. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the way that we walk through. But I tend to get the more humoristic type of responses when we do the icebreakers, and they are, kind of cool. We'll ask some questions about, what was the biggest mistake that you ever made, and how did you respond from that? And some people will say, well, I'm still too young to say that I've made the biggest mistakes.
That's what he said. Oh, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. Okay. I wouldn't let him get by with that. That's a good answer though. I have to keep that in mind. Okay. Okay. That's a good one. That's a good one. But so I want to go back to what you mentioned before about I,
Humor.
about keeping it, like keeping it unique in a
Mhm.
sense. How do you maintain the uniqueness of your podcast?
Well, the uniqueness for me is consistency. Like, I want listeners to hear when the question was presented about, if you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would that be? Like, how did everyone respond to it? What did this person say? What did that person say? So I wanted the uniqueness to be around the consistency, that you have everyone from the president and CEO of an organization
Mhm.
to somebody who is a counselor in a nonprofit organization. And they all have some sense of passion that drives what they do in their personal life and their professional life. And how does that have a sense of continuity as people? So, for those who are regular listeners, there's some questions that they are kind of looking to the response that people are going to share because they've heard someone else say it. And the ones that's really interesting is if you can have dinner with anyone. That one is really interesting to hear from person to person to person, and almost kind of keep a scorecard of who it is.
Right.
And then, when you ask people, like, what is it that they have to say, it's interesting to draw a comparison of what people are going to say. And they do give such incredible responses. So we did a compilation of our interviews from our first season. And
Really?
it was great to take 15 of those that we interviewed and to see how that consistency played out in terms of the responses that people gave. So that's a uniqueness for us.
Well, have you did you actual? This is interesting. I didn't think about this. Did you actually do a compliment? Did you show? Did you actually have those pieces as part of a podcast?
So we did a YouTube clip. We have it live, or well, we have it accessible on our website, so people can go in and listen. And we did post it
Okay.
as we called it season one recap because we wanted to
Oh,
do like a
oh,
promotion for it.
okay.
So we did have it available. It still is available on our website. It was
Okay.
really popular. A lot of the people who were featured in it were really thrilled to see. But our post production person did that, and it was really nice. And the way that he did it, he had their image, and their image was black and white. But when the rotation went to that person, their image turned into full color, and then you could hear their voice, and it made a circle around everyone. It was a really fun way to wrap up the first season.
That was very unique. I didn't think about that. So now you're sharing some ideas. Thank you, Mr. Greg DeShields.
Well, you know what? I love the idea of doing the solo episode. So tell me about when you do a solo episode. Do you like number one, how long is that episode? And like how do you come up with that amount of content to talk about?
You know, that's thank you for asking that question, but because I never really thought about answering that before. But I what there are certain topics I want to cover. Okay. And I decide now I research and I research the topic and provide information that's relevant to the topic of the podcast. And then I actually have a script, okay, and then notes with topics I'm going to just things I'm going to talk about around this particular topic. And I'm just like it's like not it's like I'm a lecturing, but it's really not lecturing because I add little tidbits here and there. I start off, I laugh, I joke, and I laugh myself in my with my audience. So okay, I say okay, so you think this is funny, but listen to this. So basically, it becomes. I feel as if I become an entertainer in a sense because I want to make sure I can be serious about certain things, but at the same time, I want to make it entertaining to people. So basically, I'll say some of the statistics or something, but then I'll go back. I said, well, back in the day, this is what happened, and back in the day, so you make it like a conversation, as if you're speaking to people face to face. That's how I perceive it in terms of my. It's not like I'm sitting here reading, and this is what this said. That's not what I do. Most likely, I'm familiar with the topic because I've done the research prior to that. But it all relates to the research I've done over the last umpteen years as being an educator or professor. So there are topics that relate to what I already know. It's not like I'm starting from scratch. So if it's a topic I already know, I'm just enhancing the information. But I also bring some what would I call this? How do you when you have a topic and then you bring something that may relate to you individually related to that topic. I think that is what probably gets the audience to stay engaged because I'm not just talking of facts and saying this is what happened. I relate it to something that happens to me or member of my family or friend of mine. So it becomes real to a person, not like something just in a textbook or something online. So I think for me that helps. I have it's like a dialogue with my audience that's not looking at me at the same time.
Got it.
That's what it is. If I can describe that, it's like I'm having a dialogue with my audience, and we're just not live. We're just, I'm just talking about this topic, and I think that is what keeps me going with it because I've done several of those. Matter of fact, I have taped at least. I've had at least 16, where it's just me.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't hope I have to do that again. But I'm just saying. I'm just saying, but I was adamant. I like you. I mean, I admire you for your, episodes. Have your second season stuff. I'm just saying it's a lot of work, and that's not joke. It's a lot of work, but it goes back to your issue of passion. But I want to add also for me, not just passion, but also purpose. So those are the two pieces: passion and purpose. My goal is to share information. And in different forms and fashions. So, like I said, I bring guests on that may enhance or emphasize certain areas that I may not cover, that I feel that the audience needs to know these topics. But for me, when I do my single thing, I have an array of topics I can discuss really without even having a script. I just look at the topic and because I looked at my notes, I said, well, honey, I said, I didn't make notes for all these lectures. I just got a topic, but it's something that I already know about. It's not something I have to learn about. And all still relates to topics that I want to share with the audience. And then I say, then I end up having guests that may emphasize more about the topics after I've discussed it. So
Mhm.
either I'm doing a prelude, okay,
Mhm.
or postlude. So it depends on how I place my individual piece.
Mhm.
Right. Sometimes I may need someone to talk about, and I emphasize it in the next episode. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. So this is not like it's coming out of where's this coming from? So
Right.
people, you want to engage the audience. So
Mhm.
if you talk about this and say, okay, this is what somebody talked about last time, and this time I'm going to speak about this topic. So you
Mhm.
engage them, you bring them in, so they'll come back the next time. This could happen again. So
Mhm.
that's like audience. I mean, it's not related to what would you call that? Audience interest.
Well, there's that continuity and continuation of the story. There's a theme that you're able to follow through.
Right. That's what I do. So then, and I'll tell them. And actually, I'll do a summary. I'll do summary. And I do summaries, and I
Mhm.
do precursors, which means I'll tell people we talked about this, and so forth and so
Mhm.
on. And it takes about 15 minutes or so, and that's one single episode that I've done by myself. Then I'll
Mhm.
do another episode where I'm going to say this for the upcoming season, and this is the next couple of episodes. We're going to be
Right.
having these topics, blah 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 blah. That's another 15 minutes. So that's a singular.
Mhm.
All right. So that's
Mhm.
just trying to answer your question about what do you do when you don't have a guest.
Right.
I know you can't always get guests when you want to get them. Okay.
Right.
So I'm not going to like fall apart, let my things
Mhm.
fall. So you become, you know, you just start creating ways to do
As
it.
you go on, that's
Okay.
it.
You understand, you know.
You do. So, I do want to ask you because we've talked about a lot of the light and airy kind of friendly stuff that happens, but there's also some real prickly stuff that, happens, the popular your podcast is there are people who want to share their point of view, which might be a little complicated
Hmm.
in order to share. It's not that you want to limit people's access, but aside from having a great person who tells a great, passionate story, there's probably someone who also has a really complicated story and trying to make the decision about is this the platform from it? And if I do it, can I do it? Like, for example, last year we interviewed a trans person, and I'm very familiar with the person, and I know there is an incredible story to tell, but I was not sure how the story would be perceived. Now we had some
Is
control
that
over.
important? Is that important to you?
Well, so here's the thing, like when we did the interview, the story was so powerful I kind of went past that. It was like, maybe it was just my own paranoia about, having that person on, but the story was so powerful. Now, we had some control of where we were going to distribute it and how we were going to distribute
Okay.
it.
Okay.
But the story was so powerful, it really resonated with a larger audience than we had even thought. But that was an example of where, it was somewhat of a complicated choice to say, yes, let's go ahead and do that. I have a couple.
Why was it complicated for you?
Well, I mean, clearly there has been a backlash, politically speaking, around the trans community. I certainly felt that I wanted to be supportive of the community and I wanted to provide a platform. I wasn't going to say, no, we weren't going to talk about it. But what I did want to do was to be mindful about number one, how the interview would go and what the interview would look like and how we would go about distributing it and how we would respond to some of the feedback that we might get. I mean, we stood on freedom of speech, which we felt allowed for us to be able to produce this content. But it was more than just, well, here's a great podcast and we'll interview. Like, we really had to give a lot of thought
Mm-hmm.
to all of it, how we were able to do the post production in a way that, there was really powerful transition from one question to another. Because as you know, sometimes you're in an interview and there might be a little dead air, or maybe, well, they didn't respond to that quite the way. So we did have to be very specific in how we wanted to do the editing so that it was a very smooth transition. We mindfully took out vocalized pauses so that the dialogue, had a very consistent and accurate use of language. So we're very mindful of a lot of the different pieces. But I was just curious if you've had maybe some difficult subjects that you have either had or you were evaluating, and we're trying to figure out how you would do that in a podcast.
That's a great question. I never thought about it from the context you mentioned, but I'll be honest with you. You know, I am a person who's open to everyone. And if
Mhm.
I feel I cannot have this person on my podcast, they choose not to come. I may want this person to have a platform with me. I'm okay
Mhm.
with that. Okay. So if there are other, people, listeners who aren't interested, turn it off. That's my
Right.
perspective. Okay.
Mhm.
So no, if it's a topic that I feel this person has to offer, I will ask them to come, invite them. And,
Mhm.
like I said, it's not pre-scripted. Okay. It's just a basic topic and things, talk about other things. I'll let the principal, if I may not agree with this person, doesn't mean I don't have them on my podcast. I
Mhm.
mean, if they don't, if they feel they can take a look at what I've had already, and they can say, well, I don't know if this will fit where I want to have to say, and they won't come. They will say no to me, and that's okay.
Mhm.
All right, so they'll
Mhm.
self-select out. Okay, but
Mhm.
I'm saying if there's somebody who I contact, and if, whatever the issue may be, and some people may not, if it's the gun situation or whatever, have your perspective, but it has to relate to topics that I'm talking about within the context of my podcast. It's not going
Mhm.
to be something, uh, that has nothing, no relevance to my topic or the
Mhm.
focus of my podcast. My focus, like I said, the focus of my podcast relates to things that related to the issues of my book, desegregation
Mhm.
of New York City schools, and segregation, desegregation in the North and Midwest, and people who were engaged in it, people who experienced it, people who wrote books about it, people who interviewed about it, or people who have been involved in issues since then. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's and it relates to across different realms. There are people who may be involved with who are people, music people, because I said the relationship between music and education. People who
Mhm.
may have been sports people, people who may have been fashion designers or something, and they said this is what I chose to do after I left the music and art school. So those topics are different, and of course, some people are uncomfortable with
Mhm.
people who don't fit a certain frame for them. And then I
Mhm.
say people just don't listen. Okay. But I think people should have open access to hear, talk about things they want to talk about. But like I said,
Mhm.
I give people an option. If they don't want to talk in my podcast, that's fine. But I think
Mhm.
that they have something I want them to offer to my audience. And if they
Right.
choose to come, that's how
Mhm.
I do it. I don't turn well, I can't have this because I'm afraid what the audience is going to say. No. I've
Right.
never to this day been able to even say that I would
Right.
be not have someone on my podcast because I'm
Mhm.
concerned about what other people say. Because I'll be honest with you, I keep it real.
That's good. That's really good. I mean,
I
and
keep it
that's really what you want with that type of podcast.
right,
Hey, listen, someone sent me an email earlier today because they are launching a podcast.
right.
So they said, in your conversation, can the two of you please talk about just how much does a podcast cost? And next part is, can I make any money off of it? So,
I can imagine who that is on the other side. Okay. That is well, I'm glad the person's asking. That is a very big challenge. Like I said, you brought it up in the beginning about passion.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. If you do not have the passion to do this, don't do it.
Don't do it. That's it.
Don't do it. That's number one. All right. Number two, like with anything else, it comes with a cost. It comes from cost with time,
Mhm.
energy, finances, and having a heart to sustain whatever it takes to get there. Okay.
Mhm.
Right. So I say that because I know what I chose to do, and it's not easy, but you really have to be committed to the process and committed
Mhm.
to the topic that you want to share with the audience. Okay.
Mhm.
And people in general. If you're not, you're not gonna get through the first 2, 3 episodes. I'll be honest
Mhm.
with you. You're not gonna do it. Okay. And then you find other ways to supplement the finances you may not be getting from the podcast and get it elsewhere. Like I told you, I have several hats out there. Okay.
Right.
All right. So that's the other thing. So
Mhm.
you have the individual who wrote the email and everyone else who's listening, you have to decide the boundaries you're going to take to determine if you want to pursue this podcast that you want to pursue. Okay. But I believe that If you start it, then as you go down the line, other opportunities will come about. It may not be exactly where you think it's going to be, but it will, because I'm saying to you, it has happened to me. All right.
Mm.
But the financial is the biggest piece, to be honest.
Right.
It's the biggest
Right.
piece.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I'm comfortable with making the commitment financially. Um, because I see already when people have sent me emails or whatever, for me, I got together. Let me just share this real quickly, for the person who may be listening about that question. I started with the classmates. I told you people started with access after my book. Okay. So what I decided to do for the first 2 episodes, to gather people from my 4th grade class experience, who may not all been in my classroom, but the majority of them were in my class in 4th grade when this desegregation, quote unquote, experience took place, which is rare. To get people this age who are still around who were in my 4th grade is very rare. I was able to get 11 of us. 11.
Mm-hmm.
11. Okay. And they didn't have to say yes. They all were enthusiastic. Okay. And if I didn't have, like, you rub a person's, rub it off, their passion for volunteering to be on the podcast, not 1, but 2 episodes, I couldn't stop.
Wow.
Okay. So that's what I'm saying. And then I hear people say, "Oh, how'd you find your classmates? How'd you find this?" I said, "Look, I'm a researcher. What can I tell you?" So, don't ask me, but I'm just saying I was able, but I was still in touch with 1, 2, 3, with 4 of the people already. Then those people contacted the other people who I was in touch with, and it just spread like wildfire. And people said, well, one person said, ask somebody who, can I be on it? This person was in my classroom, and she asked,
Right.
she wanted to be on. I mean, people really want to be involved. If you ask them, they'll say yes. Okay. And I had to put 2 episodes together. I couldn't do it in 1 episode.
Wow.
They wanted to talk about it. They wanted to share experiences, and we hadn't seen people in years. And and then to be honest with you, what happened? One of the young ladies who was on, there was a fellow who was in our class. We were in the same exact class, and there was a fellow in the class who was there also, who was on a podcast, and she actually admitted after all these years of how she had a crush on him. I said, oh, only in America, right? Only on my podcast would this happen. Unbelievable. She said, I had a crush on him. And I'm like, oh, wow. After all these years. So those kinds of moments give me the energy to say,
do it. Yeah.
Let me just keep doing this. Okay. So the person who wrote to you in this email, if you can find other ways to compensate for finding financial support that will allow you to keep your podcast going until something turns, then I would highly recommend to get started. You gotta start. You can't just sit there waiting. Nothing's gonna happen. You gotta, like they used to say, New York City had a commercial model when they first started the lottery, New York State Lottery. You got to be in it to win it.
To win it. That's right.
Okay.
Well, I've always looked at it as a passion project. And, if you really have the passion for it, you will find your way to kind of navigate through it. There are a number of times you'll send invitations out and you think that it would be easy enough for someone to say, of course I'll do it. I've had people who will say, oh, can I do it next year? And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm talking about this year.
I know.
Year, a whole different conversation.
So how did you handle? Let me ask you, how did you handle that? Just to be curious.
Well, so I had an immediate response that I felt, but I said, okay, I can't do that. So she said, oh, can I do it next year? And I said to her, yes, let's talk about it in 2026. And I felt it was a very definitive message to say that's how far away this conversation would be. So, and I'll just trace you for sometime next year. But yeah.
Okay,
so
it works. It depends. It all depends. And what I'm saying is, some people. I mean, I was amazed that I think I've only had one person out of. I basically have covered 50 episodes. Okay.
Wow.
And there was only one person who was hesitant. one out of
Right.
all, the only one
Yeah.
person, which is interesting. But I think the person had to go and look and see what other kinds of who else when they've been on, or maybe researched me. Who knows? I don't know. And
Yeah.
finally
Yeah.
volunteered
Yeah.
said yes. So it all
Observe.
depends. But I think that you're right about the passion thing. You're not going to do this just to be doing it. I'm sorry, you're just not going to do
Yeah.
it. Okay. And I get really exhilarated when it's interesting. I'm gonna say, oh, I'm exhausted. But once I have this, especially when I have a guest, I said, I love this. I love it. Okay. It's beyond what I expected. Um, but like I said to the caller about the finance, if you just weigh everything on finance, you'll never get there. You'll never start
That's
anything.
it.
Okay. So you got to start where you are.
Well, well, Teresa, you and I, we're podcast hosts, so we could probably talk for hours on end.
Exactly. We sure
So
can.
so it looks like we're almost about an hour into our dialogue, and I think that was about the amount of time we had
Yeah.
allocated. But I did want to leave, just a few minutes to kind of wrap up. So, are there some closing thoughts that you have?
Well, I just want to say that, if people are going to select, if they want to do this, to go on this journey, I would say, yes, do it. Okay. And make it for you, make it out of your own, not from me or from Greg. For you, make it for you. Okay. And that makes it unique. Okay. I think that being authentic is crucial because people will tell in a minute if it's not. All right, and then you won't get people who listen. People won't, if you're YouTube, they won't be watching your YouTube. You'll just fade away. So I just think if you're authentic about who you are and you're bringing something to people that they want to hear or listen or learn about, go for it.
Well,
Okay.
Well, I think my closing thought is that podcasting has really created an incredible way to tell stories that probably would not be told and to absorb them in a way that would not necessarily be absorbed. And I am so appreciative of Alive, as I'm sure you are, Teresa, how they create this platform for Black storytellers to talk about everything from psychology to tourism and hospitality, but more importantly, delivering very authentic content from Black
Mm-hmm.
storytellers to a very diverse audience. And I'm appreciative of that. And I certainly encourage anyone who has had a chance to listen to Teresa and I that you visit the library of different podcasters on the Alive Podcast Network because there's some really great content that's there. So, with that being said, Teresa, as I say on my podcast, that's a wrap.
We'll see you next time.
What is your closing statement? What do you say at the end of your
I
podcast?
said thank you. I tell people thank you for listening to another episode of the Soul Stocking Sisters podcast. We'll see you next year, next week, next tomorrow, whatever. I basically say I thank people from all over the world, all over the country, all over the city, all over the state. That's it.
Wow.
I close it like that. I put a closure in terms of people, whoever you are, and thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, mine is thank you so much for joining us for this particular episode and having the opportunity to listen to diverse individuals tell you about the passion and the purpose that they have in their life. And until next time, this has been Greg DeShields as well as Theresa Canada. So thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye now. Okay, so we're no longer live. The recording has stopped.
Live. Oh, you
So